All right, welcome back. So we're going to build something. Again, it's tiny. It's not going to amaze you, but we're at least using the things we've learned so far. So variables alongside data types and having to convert data types using format strings, that sort of thing. So what we're going to build is a converter, which apparently is spelled both with an ER and an OR. Anyway, what it's going to do is take kilometers and convert them to miles. Or you could easily make it work the other way around. Totally up to you. But the somewhat new part, the novel bit, is that it's going to ask a user in the command line, how many kilometers do you want to convert to miles? And then the user will type in, I don't know, 50 or something like that. So here's here's how it will work. Let me clear out my terminal. And I have a file, a solution file. I'll just run that now, Python3 converter.py. How many kilometers did you run today? Let's say I did a long race. I did a 50K. My 50 kilometer run was 31.07 miles. So notice how it asked me for input. Same thing here. Let's say I only ran, let's do 9 kilometers, which is 5.59 miles. So that's what we're going to build. And the first thing we need to talk about is how we actually get user input. So let's make a new file. I'm going to call it mileage.py. Call it whatever you want. If you're using Cloud9, open the file up with the Cloud9 editor. Use Sublime Text if you're on a Mac or a PC and you have it installed, or just any text editor. But I have the subl command. So I'm going to open it up. And the first thing I'm going to show you is this little bit of magic called input. And it's actually no more magic than any other bit of Python code, but it's a function just like the other ones we've seen, like print or int to convert something to an integer, or str for string. We haven't talked really about functions, but that's all we're going to say for now. And input will ask the user to enter something. It doesn't even really ask the user. It just changes the prompt in the command line, and it waits for the user to type something and hit the return key, hit the enter key. And the important thing is that we need to store the value in a variable. So I'm going to just call it kms. So we're going from kilometers to miles in my version, but feel free to do it the other way around. You'll just need to change the coefficient that we divide or multiply by. So kms equals input. And let's start by just printing a line up here that, I don't know, let's go with how many kilometers do you want to convert? Did you cycle today? Why not? It's a little less crazy to do 50 kilometers cycling versus running. And all we'll do after this is just print. Okay, you said, and let's make this an F string. Or actually, let's just do concatenation. So, okay, you said plus kms. So it's going to just parrot it back to the user. So let's go to the command line now. Okay, so here we are, and the file is called mileage.py, so Python3 mileage. And it says, how many kilometers did you cycle today? Let's say I did 57. Okay, you said 57. Very useful program, thank you. It's working just fine. So input, again, gets input from the user and saves the value in a variable. Now, what data type is it? This is important. You can actually infer it already based off of the fact that this worked. Remember, if it was a number, it wouldn't, if it was an integer or a float, it would not concatenate with a string. So we can deduce that it is a string. But that's going to be a problem because we need to do math with it. So right now it's a string 50, like this. And if we try and divide it, and I think I'll look it up, but it's 1.6 something to go from kilometers to miles. Here, let me do that now. There we go. On Google, 1 mile is 1.60934. Okay, so I'm going to copy that, and I'm just going to paste that here for now. So of course, this won't work. First of all, it won't print anything out or save it to a variable, but also it's a string divided by a float. That's a problem. So what we want to do is turn kms that the user entered into a float. So we could do it just like this. If you're comfortable with doing sort of 2 layers here of taking the float of the input, and that works fine. We could also do this. So float. And the reason I'm doing float, by the way, is for more precise division, because let's say the user entered 50.5 kilometers. If we turn that into an int, it would turn it into 50 and then divide by 1.6, versus if they entered 50.5 and we cast it as a float, it will stay 50.5. Okay, so let's save this to a variable and we'll call it miles equals float kilometers, which is the user input, divided by 1.60934. Let's see if that works now. And maybe, just maybe, we'll have an error. Let's see what happens. Let's say we did 8 kilometers. And we didn't even get the error I expected. We did something really silly, or I did. I'm not using miles. I'm just printing out the initial input. So we did this math and it just goes to waste. All right, let's try that again. So we did 8 and we get an error. Okay, so this is the one I was expecting. Notice we get a type error. Must be string, not float. So what's happening is this concatenation is upset because this is a float. The result of the division is a float. Regardless of the fact that this is a float, remember that any regular division where there's a single division sign, single slash, is going to be a float. If we did a double one, it would be integer division. Okay, so a float, we can't just add that to a string. So we're going to use handy dandy f strings. So rather than just saying, okay, you said, let's say that is equal to, and in here, we'll put our miles variable, and then afterwards, just type the word miles. So we should get that is equal to 7 miles or 6.2 miles or whatever we want. Now let's try running it again. I ran cycled 8 kilometers. That's equal to 4.97098 blah, 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 blah miles. So it's working. The math is working. The problem, or it's not necessarily a problem, but it's kind of annoying, is how many decimal points we get here. We don't really want that. So let's round it, which is new. We don't know how to do that yet. Fortunately, it's very simple. There's another little function called round. Round is a bit different than something like input in that we actually provide two different items, two pieces of data to it. The first is the thing to round, and the second is how many decimal points to round it to. So I'm going to comment that out for now. Command / on Sublime Text or just Octothorpe #. And we have a couple choices. We could just round it right here. So round miles, and let's go to 2 decimal points. So this works. Remember that inside these curly braces, it's sort of, it's regular Python where we could do math. We could call something like round. It depends on, how long your code is. You don't want this to be excessively long in the middle of your string, but it's not a problem as far as the code goes. So now let's try it. Let's do 8 again. There we go, 4.97 miles. So we could do it this way, or we could come up here and do round and do this whole thing, comma 2. But I actually think it's better to do it on a separate line because that line gets a little bit long. So let's do miles equals round miles 2. Down here we just display miles. So all we're doing is repeating this. It is another line, but it's a little nicer to read. So we're doing the math first, and then we could even call this rounded miles if we want, but I'm just going to call it miles and update it to be rounded of the current value of miles to 2 decimal places. And let's just double check that it still works. Let's say we ran, let's go with 30 kilometers. That's equal to 18.64 miles. Great. Seems to be working just fine. The last change we could make is just tell the user kilometers first and then miles. So instead of saying that is equal to, we could say your curly braces kms kilometer ride is, and then let's do MI. So we're just working with abbreviations. So this should say something like your 10 kilometer ride is, what is 10 kilometers? Whatever the math is in miles. Let's try that again. 10 kilometers. Your 10K ride is 6.21 miles. Great. We could do was instead, but otherwise that's it. So kind of the way we went about this, I was trying to showcase a couple things, kind of force us to encounter that type error was a big one, where input gives us a string, but we're trying to do math with it, so we need to turn it into a float. But then to print it out, we can't concatenate because it's a float now, so we need to use an f string. And that's really the key thing here. Round was a nice little bonus on top, but it's not something we covered in this section. We will come back to functions like round. We'll come to that later. But for now, this is all that we need. It's a nice, simple little converter. Probably will never use it ever. But it's still, given the small amount of pieces that we have in our toolbox, it's something at least. It's better than just, printing a single variable out. Okay, next up, we're moving on to Boolean logic.